Welcome back again to Conservation Conversations. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday night. We are weekly at the moment and really excited to have been running these for almost 50 episodes now. It's a range of guests from conservation backgrounds to musical backgrounds, people involved with preserving tradition and yet innovating at the same time. So I'm hoping you caught my chat last week with Chris Avery, the adventuring musician who goes on hikes and trains and bike-powered music tours, either solo or as a duo with Falcon's Drift, and who works with artists like Cynefin, the innovative new Welsh folk singer. And this is continuing in the tradition, if you like, of what we've always done with these conservation conversations, which is talk to people who I believe are innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible out there in the music scene and the ecology scene to inspire people in the way that Stornoway has always strived to do. But I'm particularly excited about today's guest, as in Stornoway land we move on through the festival summer, and we have just a couple of gigs left next month in August before we hit the road for our full-on album release tour. I'm really grateful to be taking a moment today to record this conversation with Guy Hayward, who's the co-founder of the British Pilgrimage Trust. So a bit about them before I welcome Guy into the call. The BPT is dedicated to modernizing the ancient practice of pilgrimage. So it's not just about going out and having a casual stroll, although that's what Stornoway sings about quite often. Guy really takes people out on guided pilgrimage in a patient way, a slow way that seeks to blend a bit of mindfulness and well-being and connectivity into the experience of getting out and about and moving your legs. And so it's the perfect Venn diagram overlap, crossover of so many of the messages that Stornoway is about. We love musical tradition, nature tradition, conserving biodiversity, and going outside and appreciating it as a way to connect with something bigger than ourselves and access the bigger picture. So the BPT is also secular, so it seeks to create connections between people of all faiths and also no faiths. And it's, I think, very important to look at how getting out there and appreciating nature can be a way of bringing people together, connecting people who might otherwise be quite polarized and driven apart in today's fraught world that we all live in, for better or worse. So the BPT, if you follow them, please do so. Even as we're talking here, you could just click up to the top and click follow on their profile when I invite Guy in as a co-host of this call. But they encourage people to walk for your body and pilgrim for your soul. So they drive cultural heritage in Britain that promotes holistic well-being. And they say, BYOB, bring your own beliefs. I think that's just such a powerful message. So without further ado, hello, Guy. Lovely to be chatting to you today. Welcome to Conservation Conversations.
Oh, good. Yeah. A bit of a tongue twister. I like it.
Yeah, it took me probably the first 20 episodes to finally be able to intro it without stumbling over that. It deliberately
like the word pilgrimage itself, actually.
Yeah.
We've had a few Radio 4 presenters who can't even pronounce it, even on live air. So yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
It's what led you to select pilgrimage as a way of life and something to inspire people with? Have you always been doing it this all your life?
No, not at all. I was only really until I was 27. I mean, that I really started. And I was house sitting for the Sheldrakes, Rupert Sheldrake, Jill Pearce, and his sons Merlin and Cosmo. And one dinner, or I think Saturday, like they invited these two wandering minstrels called Will and Ed over for dinner, and I started hearing the tales of cooking by the campfire, singing around the fire, like bathing the rivers, foraging for food, going to pubs and being welcomed into people's homes through the joy of sharing traditional song from the land that you're walking through. And I loved it so much. I was doing a PhD on group singing and how it forms community around the world. looking at rhythmic synchronization. So I was a little bit kind of stuck behind a laptop in academic world. And this idea of going right out into the land and getting fully immersed through culture, through sharing song, which just seems amazing to me. So after about it, I walked the river Cam to Cambridge, and then on once I'd and it was part of the final bit of my PhD, and then I just after that I got in touch with Will and said, could we go on a walk, taking a song back to where it came from? Actually, no, he said that. I said, can I go on a walk? And he said, yeah, well, Sam Lee's given us this song called the Hartlake Bridge Tragedy. It's from the sort of pickled from the archives of Cecil Sharp, and let's go and rewild it back into its original place. And I thought, wow, what an amazing poetic idea. So we walked along the River Medway for a week, 70 miles, singing the song to everyone we met, learning it by the campfire. And then when we got finally to the end, the monument where the people were buried that had died in the tragedy that the song was about, the Hartlake Bridge tragedy, about 30 hop pickers had died. There was this couple standing by the monument, literally no one else in the churchyard, no one else in the village, and we'd been walking a whole week. So the timing was amazing. And then what are you doing here? And they said, well, 10 years ago, we tried to find this place. We're here for 5 minutes. We said, wow, amazing. What's your connection to the tragedy? They said, well, 3 of my ancestors died in the tragedy. And I'm like, wow. And that's incredible. And have you heard the song? And they hadn't heard the song. So we got to return the song to the bloodline and not just the place. And I think that was a big turning point inside. I could feel it in my body. My body just buzzed with meaning and sort of synchronicity and what's the word, like a kind of fate, I suppose. Like it felt like a turning point. And then I turned to Will and I said, what just happened? That was incredible. And he said, well, I've been walking for multi-month journeys, and I never had this much organized, synchronized action and coincidences throughout the day, and throughout the journey. And basically we thought, well, why is this is sort of like pilgrimage? It's like by giving it a narrative, by having this quest of taking a song back to where it came from, it sort of it creates more magic, more coincidence. And so we thought, well, why is there no one doing pilgrimage? Feels like a pilgrimage the way we're talking about it. And then we looked into it, and Henry VIII had banned it in 1538. And so pilgrimage was literally banned and condemned, and so it sort of became a taboo practice in this country for 500 years. And then we thought, well, this is good in a way because it creates a blank slate on which you can build the whole rest of the journey, and you can come up with a new tradition, like bring your own beliefs you mentioned, and opening it up. And I wouldn't say, you said we're secular, I wouldn't say we're secular in as such, because that word can just mean I mean, it's not supposed to mean, but it can just mean we're not religious in any way. I think we allow it all. If you want to be religious, you can be religious. If you don't want to be, you don't have to be. And so it's not about stripping out all of these traditions. It's more about allowing all of them to coexist. And so that's really how it started. So it started by trying to rewild a song, and the idea of by singing old songs in the places from which they come from, you kind of give them new life.
Wonderful. And I'm sure you've come across folk on foot who do something similar in that they take the artist or the singer who is regarded as closely connected to a piece of music, and they follow their journey to maybe not the place, if that song is maybe more ubiquitous. You say it's about rivers in general or mountains in general, but they take the audience with the artist on a journey to a significant place. I love the idea that you have only one place from which a song was created. It's that's really special.
Literally called Hartlake Bridge, and it was by Hadlow in Kent. And I have actually appeared on one, I think the May's episode of Folk on Foot, and we were singing Robin Hood songs and telling the story of Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. That's where we went.
Wonderful. With John Bowden, wasn't
it? No, that was with Matthew Bannister.
Okay. I think I'm confusing a couple of different ones.
It was just me. There was no one else.
Yeah. Okay. I think John's done something in Sherwood Forest as well, but perhaps not a Robin Hood related thing.
Oh, right, okay, fine.
But this is brilliant. So then, can we talk about the blend of conservation and ecology and what role that plays in the pilgrimages? Apart from being outside makes you appreciate nature more, I'm sure you find that people on the walks derive a kind of well-being from just being immersed back into nature and away from the city. But is there any particularly tangible or intentional role that ecology plays?
So there are different ways to do this. Like, I think a lot of people think of pilgrimage as something which is, what can it give me? How can it heal me? And there's a focus on the internal individual development. Obviously, as without, so within, as within, so without kind of thing. So the newer forms of, and more exciting, I think, and next stage, next gen versions of pilgrimage are things like this pollinator pilgrimage we did recently, where we sowed seeds as we walked along at the right time of year, and singing bee songs and seeding songs like the Seeds of Love and Tell the Bees, and like the Peter Bellamy version, and so that was a sort of pollinator one. Then we also did, well, we partner with this thing called the Friends of the River Medway pilgrimage, and they have a really interesting way of doing pilgrimage. They get a local community based around a river, the River Medway, and then they walk from source to sea along the whole length of the river with about 40 people, core group, and then invite people along the way. And they function on many different levels. So the individual, spiritual, and emotional level, but also the legal, the practical, and the kind of collective spiritual. So the legal is about trying to get people to see how the river should be given legal rights as a living entity. So they organize their conferences with the stakeholders along the way, and councillors and politicians, and they manage to get pledged towards that. Then there's the practical, like cleaning up the river, and citizen science as they go along. And then finally, there's the collective spiritual, which is more about chanting and ceremonies along the way, and sacred offerings of physical offerings of clay with flowers and fruit and nuts and precious metals, and then giving them to the waters as you go along. And the most dramatic was on these tall ships sailing out into the basically the North Sea, and where the Medway meets the North Sea, and near where the Thames also meets the North Sea, and then throwing this really large, incredibly beautiful sacred offering into the final waters of the river. And so it's multi-layered, and so it's not just about what does it do for me, but what does it do for nature, and how can we close the loop really, and honor and give back. So I think there's simple things that people can do when they walk as blessing nature as they go along. You know, tourists consume a lot when they go in general, but one thing you can do is to give back. And one thing you give back is the concept of blessing. But if that's too spiritual and too woo-woo for you, then you can find other ways of giving back, which might require more practical focus and stuff. So there's that. There's also the Rogation Sunday tradition that is a forgotten tradition. It's like 1,500 years old. Basically, it's where a local community walks out from their church, and the focus is on walking out into the local parish, visiting all the sacred places like the holy wells, the ancient trees, the stone circles, and the river sources, and then also beating the bounds of the parish and praying and singing songs and walking as a community to actually know your place. So that's a more kind of Christian tradition, but I think it will have had a lot older origins than that. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff you can do. And I hope pilgrimage as a whole moves more towards the inner and the outer.
You're really inspiring me here to go back to my catalogue of folk songs. So for the past year and a bit, I've been learning a folk song a day. Started on the 1st of January 2025. I got 365, which was my target, and I went through that to reach 500 not long ago. But along that list, so songs that I think I'd say most of which are now in my head. I can recall them verse for verse, and certainly the tunes are very sticky because these are the oldest songs, and they're not good because they're old. They're old because they're good. So they
Yeah,
stick, and they've survived centuries of uh, people, only settling on the best material. They've
yeah,
evolved. So amongst that list, there are plenty of songs where I can tell they're about a place or perhaps a big enough region that contains many places, but I can't quite pinpoint which would be the destination I'd go to if I was doing a pilgrimage of this kind. The one that comes to mind is the Dutch on the Medway. I think Peter Bellamy may have done a version of that, as you mentioned him. But the idea that I'd go to the Medway, somewhere in the Medway, how do you pick? Is my point. So if you're
huh.
presented with maybe a whole river as a stretch of area that might be valid in the choice, how do you pick this particular point? Is it just different every time, case by case basis?
Well, I know it's sort of maybe not a cop out answer. Actually, I think it's where your heart feels pulled, and I think the head will eventually come into it, but you'll have an instinct. You'll just feel pulled in a certain direction. You'll just be thinking about a certain place or region, and then you can refine from there onwards and think, well, why am I thinking of that region so much? Why am I being drawn to that song? Or um, so be although all songs, there are lots of good old songs, each person has songs which speak to them more than others. You know, there are songs out there that people think are absolutely amazing songs that you might not think, you think they're good, but they're not really your song. So, but there might be other songs that other people think, well, that's all right. But you think it's really important. So I think it's about finding, maybe being moved by the song first, or the land second, or more maybe the land first and the song second. And hopefully they just join up and they align, and then you end up with the right thing. So um, you could go to Cecil Sharp and ask a house in the library and ask them for advice, or search in a place on the Full English Archive website and type in the postcode and find the nearest song that was collected from that area, and then just sort of do some
Mm.
research. So you could do it in an academic way,
Yeah,
or you could
based
do it
on
more in a.
collection of the material. That's another one. Yeah.
But the original person that started off Cecil Sharp's collection was this lady in Somerset who knew 400 songs, a bit like you knowing 500 songs. So almost the more songs you've got, probably the better you'll find. You'll know, just there'll be one song from within that
Mm.
500 that just keeps speaking to you,
Yeah.
and then it'll just calm it. Like listening to your heart and basically being quiet with yourself and feeling your body pulled in a certain direction is probably a better way of working it out than being too research or academically
Yes,
driven.
yes, it's possible with all the categorizations and the indexing of folk songs to get really dry and into the minutia of, is this folk song the same as that one, which
Yeah.
shares most of the lyrics but has actually got a totally different history. But I think, yeah, being heart led on the whole thing, that's very sensible advice. Thank you.
Mm. Yeah, it's a bit sort of classic, new agey, but it's at the end of the day, it knows better than you do.
That's a really good way of putting it. Thank you. Well, what have BPT got on the horizon in terms of events people can get involved with, or what would be a call to action for new pilgrims?
Well, new pilgrims, I'd say, if they're folk song pilgrims, really learn the song by heart and listen to it speaking of the land, and then have the desire of knowing the land and wanting to belong in it and wanting to become friends with the land, and see the song and the land as kind of inextricably linked. And then, because really what we need to do with the whole world and with our whole worldview is to re-enchant it. That can be religious, but it can be spiritual, it can be folk song, it can be mythological. There are loads of different ways of re-enchanting our relationship with the land. And of course, the best way to re-enchant something is to actually chant, which is sing songs. And there's something about singing songs which opens up portals into the dimensions of ways of connecting with the land you're walking through, which ecological information or stories or history doesn't do in quite the same way. Particularly as these songs come from a time when that connection with the land was so much more potent and normal. So I think what they can do, and a kind of call to action, is go to our website, britishpilgrimage.org, find a route there, a place on our, we have hundreds of places and hundreds of routes. You can find some are a day long, some are a month long. It's up to you how long you want to spend walking, and then go there. They can come on a guided pilgrimage. They can find sanctuaries where it's low cost community run accommodation, like in village halls or church halls along ways. Or they can, there's so many different things. They could organize a group of friends who are going through a particular issue, or they could set up a kind of emotional support thing around grief, for example. We're starting to do grief pilgrimages, and getting people who are walking with bereavement all walking together and along a route is a very special thing to do. But I think to bring in singing is very joyful. And so, yeah, I think because this podcast is largely focused around people who are interested in singing, is think of all the ways that singing could re-enchant your pilgrimage and bring your community closer together, and bring the people who live in the areas you're walking through closer together too, when you sing them the songs that remind them of the place they actually already live in. That's a beautiful thing to do. Like, I walked in the Lake District once, and I had the oldest sheep songs, like Tarry Wool and Rosebuds in June. These are really old Lancashire, Cumbrian songs. And so I sang it to shepherds that I met along the way, and they hadn't actually heard the song. They were living in the tradition, and they were heritage farmers and sheep farmers, but they hadn't actually heard the song, and yeah, it had an impact on them for sure.
This is such rich material, and I'm really glad you mentioned so many of the things you did there. I'm gonna sort of tie them together a bit, and then come to a recommendation and a question to know if you've heard of this recommendation before. But you mentioned grief and processing the loss of something as a way that brings people together, and then the love or connection to a particular place, and maybe watching that place change over time, and its traditions, and even its industries change over time, if we're talking about the shepherds. I wondered whether you might have come across this book. It's the most frequently recommended book on our little podcast here, because it blends creativity and imagination and traditions with place, a natural place particularly. It's called Mischief Acts, and it's by Zoe Gilbert.
No, I haven't. No.
Well, I'll have to send you a copy, because it's just the most beautifully written book by a local author where I am in Southeast London, and that's part of the world we sing about in our song Zorbing. In orbit over Southeast London is the line. Zoe has lived there all her life, I think, and written a couple of books inspired by the area. One's called Folk, simply. It was published on Bloomsbury, did really well. The follow-up is called Mischief Acts, and it looks at the history of the Great North Wood over the course of about 1,000 years. Some of the history is just archive history, but fictionalized with really interesting, rich characters who help a reader who isn't even part of the Great North Wood and hasn't been connected to it, but to understand how it's been influenced by the sort of gods and dryads and kings and characters who've come and gone. And then it looks into the future as well, as to what might happen if you rewilded an entire great forest, and what role would they play if you reintroduced all the old mischievous gods and nymphs and things. But I think you'd really enjoy it, Guy.
No, it sounds great.
It makes a great audiobook as well, because I'm sure, technical question here, do you allow people to wear headphones and listen to a good podcast or audiobook on the pilgrimage? Or
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, the thing is, there'll come a point when you want to take the AirPods out and then listen to the birds as well. But there shouldn't be a rule on any of this, because technology should enhance our lives. And I think walking and listening to podcasts and looking around as you're listening to ideas that connect you to the place is potentially better, because it focuses the mind on the things that matter to you at that time. And people shouldn't feel restricted by rules around how this should be done in the best way. And equally, like, there are kind of assumptions like pilgrimage has to happen in rewilded countryside landscapes. But perhaps one of the most mischievous acts you could do is to sing folk songs about nature in cities, both in where there's nature, but also introducing people to this sort of enchanted dimension within cities as well. There's no reason why pilgrimage only has to be in the countryside, and actually it might make it more accessible to people if it's in all sorts of places. Like, for example, along the River Lee in Hackney, there are all sorts of conservation projects happening along the river, and the idea that humans destroy everything is not true, because I think the best bit of Hackney is that the canal boats along the humans living along the canal with having their ecological restoration projects, whereas the river, which has no canal boats, has no humans on it, it's actually like full of sewage and doesn't have the same feel. So I think we need this misconception that we are always a problem should also be challenged. And if you start having people singing folk songs about nature in cities, I think that would change things really fast.
Yes, and it might serve to re-enchant, like you said. And so there's these stages: enchantment, which perhaps happened before humans arrived, and then we've disenchanted maybe the land around us to some extent, but not as much as we think we have, and been all the sort of villains in the picture. But we've certainly disenchanted our relationship with ourselves, and now we have to re-enchant by chanting. I love that, the way you put that there.
Yes.
Misconceptions in ecology and biodiversity and conservation are something that we're really passionate about fighting. And Brian, who sings in Stornoway, is a full-time nature reserve manager with the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, and is always out there educating the volunteer groups and the tourists who come to his site there at Llanelli about what are misconceptions about how to preserve specific bird species or habitats. And yeah, it's just been a pleasure to hear about how the pilgrimages take people that you've met out on similar adventures, so that they can get into the thick of it and appreciate nature and feel closer to it.
Yeah, I think it's the primary issue of our time is to realize that nature is all we have, and it knows so much more than we do. Not necessarily more than we do, but we are the same as it. There's no separation. And if we learn to live by its ways, like cyclicity and all the different ways that all the partnerships that happen in the forest, and to think of business more like a woodland, I think we'd be so much happier, I think.
Yeah. Well, one last recommendation then. As you said, it's all we have. I also want to spin that as it's all we are, and we're part of nature, and we exist within that whole framework. And there's an artist who's going to be on tour with us later in the year, October, November, and into February, who I'd like to recommend now, but also say, Guy, I'm going to have to get you a couple of guest passes to come make sure you see her music, because she's absolutely brilliant. It's Alice Boyd, and who has a song called All We Are, and she wrote that about the rehabilitation of the white-tailed eagle in partnership with the RSPB, who funded her to go on a pilgrimage of sorts and go record the eagle. So nature is all we are, and yeah, it's going to be thoroughly part of what we are when we're on tour later this year. I'm sure we can get you across to one of the gigs.
Yeah. And
we have considered pilgrimaging to our performances rather than traveling by tour bus, which isn't exactly environmentally friendly. But you'd be amazed at how difficult it is to route a tour so that even portions of it can happen by foot, by bike. Even train has proved really tough. We tried to make the green choice, and last July go by Eurostar to one of the European festivals, and there was a cancellation so bad that it made the front page of the news. We ended up busking to passengers after having been stranded in the cabin for about 12 hours.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to do the right thing, you know. But maybe what we should do is deliberately book a pilgrimage tour that covers perhaps a smaller area, but in a more meaningful, slower sort of ways.
Yeah, or just do it without all of that around it. Just don't put the constraints on, and let it show you a whole new way. And deeper. It's a soulful thing, you know. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've kind of, in the early days, we did a lot of really important, like the important foundational pilgrimages where it was just me and Will and maybe a couple of other people, and we did it for a week or 3 weeks, and those are the journeys which really taught me what it was all about. And then ever since then, it's been about building this charity, and I've forgotten perhaps what it is to really do a pilgrimage myself. And it's funny how that happens, trying to make it happen for everyone else. You end up not doing it for yourself. And you have to give time, and you have to give it its own way of working on you. If you try and load it up with too many commercial needs or projects or objectives, it'll have a different way of working on you. And I think you walking around with 400, 500 songs, that you don't need to have gigs and stuff planned for that.
I see. Yeah,
I don't know. There's
just in it for the adventure.
There's so much magic in just doing that. I don't know. That's maybe a bit hippie of me to say that, but
no, that's a really good, strong, clear, powerful message. I'm gonna get myself out on a hike as soon as I can and make sure I'm singing. Thank you for the inspiration.
And I think singing without necessarily needing an audience and who've bought tickets and stuff, but like sometimes just singing to a tree, I know, where that's the only audience you've got, but you are literally singing. It's very unusual, and it feels older. It feels natural. It's unusual, but it doesn't feel wrong.
Well, something that we did earlier in the year, which you reminded me of there, because it had such an unusual character, but it felt so natural, was the singing with nightingales with Sam Lee.
Oh yeah.
I think we had 6 nightingales singing back at us in the scrubland there in Sussex.
Wow.
At midnight to 1 a.m, and we were with a group of the right size because of how Sam and Singing with Nightingales runs their events. So you go out with a group who are all in it together and really grateful and in tune with the reasons for why they're there. And well, that's my third recommendation. If anyone listening has not yet been Singing with Nightingales, go check it out, and see you in April 2027.
Yeah, it really, really dissolves the barrier between us and our bird world and natural world. It's just anything that can dissolve our perceived separation is what we need.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Guy. On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much again for your time, and thanks to everybody who I can see has joined us here on this Tuesday night. It's been a pleasure talking to you all. And on behalf of the whole band, the Stornoway Gang, sending you lots of love and saying take care. See you again soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ollie.